good. So Jonathan, a longtime friend of the podcast, is here to share his story. So you're a representative at Quixel. Obviously, if people out there have been living out in Iraq, we like seeing that little logo right there on your shirt. Do you mind kind of sharing a little bit about your resume for people who haven't met you and what you are focusing today on today's talk?
That's a tall order. Yeah. So my background started in modding back in the Command and Conquer days / flight simulation and stuff. And then from there, I became a military simulation artist, and I was a production artist making tanks and the like for the better part of 6 years straight. And that was an interesting job that kind of led me into working at Quixel, in the sense that the first version of DeuX was something that I had to get familiar with to get quick at texturing things. And then they released the first version of the Quixel suite, which had a ton of problems and a ton of potential. And through working with it and constantly understanding how others worked with it and what their problems were, I was able to go to places like Polycount, just kind of volunteer some time to help out and get people to see, hey, yeah, maybe it's got bugs, but here's how you work around them and make a better product. So you don't have to be angry. You can resolve these issues that you're running into. It's no big deal. And one thing led to another, and I took an offer of employment just because, being helpful can pay a lot of dividends. And now I've been working at Quixel since late 2014, so roughly 5 years. So that's me.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a path. And a lot of these speakers that we have on share one common story is the ability to work from home, or at least work freely and just concentrate on the work. It is a trend that I hope picks up a lot sooner with everybody that is interested. So can you kind of talk briefly about that transition? We spent like about an hour talking to Colin, how he just chosen a place where he wants to kind of set his family, which is in Oregon. Can you kind of talk about your backstory of how you were able to kind of get to that position and be able to kind of work freely and concentrate on just making good art?
So that's an interesting story in and of itself. For most people, like, the beginning of this story would require like a lot of hard work, and that's kind of where mine starts too, except mine differs in the sense that I got laid off. And that's how I ended up working at home. For the longest time, I was working part-time at Quixel and then working full-time at the office. And that was not an experience I would recommend, because I was working something along the lines of 60 to 80 hours a week. But it paid off in the end, because when I eventually did get laid off from my office job, Teddy just reached out to me, Teddy being our CEO. He's like, hey, I know you need a job and you've been working with us for a long time. Why don't you come work for us full time? Which they wanted me to do that to begin with. So I took the offer, and I got to admit, man, it was scary. I mean, working from home is not the same as it is in say Europe, where you can go, you don't have to worry about healthcare and things of that nature. Like, your ability to go to the doctor here and not pay an inordinate amount of money is tied to your employer, right? Like, this because you worked at an office or you worked for a company, so you know what it's like to be on employer healthcare. Well, it's even worse when you've got 2 kids and a wife, and you got to take care of them too. So that was terrifying. And then when I eventually signed up to the healthcare exchanges and I was able to just firmly plant my butt here and work at home, and I didn't have to worry anymore, and I didn't have to wonder about, how much I hated going to work. It was nice. It was terrifying, but in the end, it was totally worth the ordeal, is the best way to put it.
The change in scheduling is definitely something too that I want to touch on, where working from home has its pros and benefits, especially within the family. It's very hard to convince the wife that you are working, that you can't do X or Y chores, because in reality you would be at office right now. Like, it's something that right. I feel like not a lot of people talk about. Can you kind of share your experience with that, and how long it took you to kind of adjust and your family adjusts to daddy or husband is working right now? Do not bother.
That is still something that we struggle with, because I'm very good at masking what it is that I'm currently doing at the time, because it looks like I'm playing video games to the kids. I work on art, so to them, my son's only 6 years old. To him, it looks like I'm playing games. So sometimes he'll come up and say, "Hey, can you come play this or something with me? You're not doing anything." And I'm like, "Kid, I'm working right now. I can't step away from this. I have to work." Like, he's actually in the other room right now. I had to ask him to be quiet because we had just gotten back from picking him up at school. And that's another thing I never got to go do. Like, I would be at the office right now and I wouldn't get home for probably another 4 hours. It's like almost 4 o'clock here. So I'd get home super late every night. And by the time I get home, he's going to bed. But I see my kids way more than I ever did. And when it comes to like your wife and whatnot, or at least my wife, it took some adjustment for her to understand innately that, yes, even though I'm home, it doesn't mean I'm available to just get up and do other things all the time. I still have obligations. I still have things I have to do. That doesn't mean I can't get up. And I do. Like today, I was able to walk out front and finish some of the prep work that we're doing to the house to sell it, which was trimming one of these giant cypress bushes I have. Again, couldn't do that when I was at the office because I was stuck there for at least another 4 hours. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And there is a bit of a learning curve where everybody has to adjust that to the fact that just because you're here now doesn't actually mean you're here. You have other things that you need to do. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard sell, especially to the children. I mean, it's hard enough to kind of sell, like I make games and kind of sell that in a way that doesn't look like I'm playing games, but to kind of be there as well and be like, well, you're already there. Why don't you just play with me? It's like, no, I'm actually, this is my job. And it's like, so that's the only thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, there are many things, but the main thing not a real fear, but what's playful is like now that, both my wife and I, myself are working from home, right? My children are young enough to kind of grow up with this mindset. It's like, well, what is work really? I see my parents all the time, which is something I hope when they grow up, they really appreciate. But in reality, it's, I wonder if it does anything in a negative way where like, well, this is what work looks like. Therefore, why am I at work? I don't know. Is that something that you always think about? Is like, how do I teach my children to like, they have to work hard first to get to this state, to be able to have the ability and the freedom to do what we're doing, which is being home and focusing on the things we want to focus on.
So that's something that my daughter has issues with right now. Like she's going through the same path in life that I went through, where she's kind of falling behind in school, not because she's not intelligent or because she doesn't know the schoolwork or anything, but because she's just lazy. How kids are, right? I was super lazy and I didn't have anybody to hold a fire to my ass to tell me, hey, you need to do this. And I mean, I'll level with you right now. Not a lot of people know this, but I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out 1 month before I was due to graduate. And if it hadn't been for my wife, I would probably still be the typical dropout with no success, working at like a minimum wage job that I hate. She pushed me to go get my GED, to go to college and to do everything else that I should have done to begin with. I just didn't have any motivation. And like, again, like when your kids watch you and they're like, oh, well, yeah, you got to this point. It's so amazing that you're here. What they don't see is the struggle, right? Like you said, they only see the end result. It took me a lot of hard work to get to where I'm at. I had to, I don't want to say suffer, but I had to deal with 6 years of working in a very, very strict type of environment where you're basically a cog in a machine. It's not like milsim is not like game art where like, yes, you're kind of another cog in a machine, but you have more creativity in games. Whereas in milsim, you have to make everything exactly to spec every single time. You're basically a glorified technician. And it was rough. Honestly, it really sucked. And then like, my daughter doesn't see this. She just saw that I went to work and I would come home. So she missed out on all these other steps that led to this. She just saw me one day. Oh yeah, I'm working at home now. I got laid off and everything's fine. Like she doesn't see I made terrible decisions at one point in my life and these things have all become who I am. Like these decisions and choices have made me who I am now. She just sees what I did and who I am, not where I came from. So I've tried to drill that into her. Like, you can't make these mistakes now. I've already made them. I'm telling you exactly where they're going to take you. Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm consciously aware of it myself, like to kind of share and relate to your story. It took me, I was spending about over a year, commuting to San Francisco. I don't know if I ever told you this. For a good year and a half, there was a really good job in San Francisco. I'm located in Orange County, so Southern California, for anybody that's not a part of California. So I didn't want to move back to the Bay Area. So I kind of kept my family down here as I was spending the week pretty much going to work, like a 9 to 5 up in San Francisco. So for a good year and a half, every weekend I would fly back or commute back to spend time. And so it was tough in a non-traditional way of spending time with the family only on the weekends. But that whole year and a half was to kind of prep for what I'm doing now, to kind of be able to work for myself, work from home. But it is a hard thing to kind of communicate to the kid, because my 8-year-old, 9-year-old now, just sees that like, hey, for a whole year you've been telling me that you would work from home after this whole thing is figured out. And now that you're home, it's like, why can't we just hang out more because you're at home anyways? It's like, well, first of all, it took a while to kind of figure this out. And now we're at a state where I can work from home and pick you up and all these little things that they'll appreciate later. Not now, but they'll appreciate later. And then slowly, if things do roll really well, then I'll work less and less. And then maybe Mondays or Tuesday will be our hangout time or something like that. But those are steps that it's hard to communicate to a child that just sees like, well, you're here, why not? And sometimes it actually does kind of correct my course a bit, where like looking through the eyes of a child, just simply like, well, you're here, why don't you hang out? It kind of forces me, you know what? I can take a break right now. You want to do something? Yeah. Let's do something, because we are kind of laser focused. And I think making opportunities for ourselves to be able to work from home now, I think kind of sets our type of personality aside and say like we're very gear focused on accomplishing self-determined tasks, but it is really hard for us to kind of pry ourselves away from that. And it's like, hey, enjoy life and then go back to it. It's a hard lesson that I'm slowly realizing.
That's been a struggle for me, is understanding when and where to step away, right? Because it's like there's no real separation from work when I'm at home. So when I'm at my computer, I'm usually working, even if I don't want to be. So one of the things I was looking forward to with a new house that we're getting ready to sell, this one, move to hopefully something a little larger with a dedicated office, is that I can just step out of it and be done. I can turn off my phone, not have to worry about it. And if I don't want to do anything, I don't have to. It's been getting closer to that. I mean, recently I got promoted at Quixel, so I'm now the support lead, in addition to community manager and simulation sales and all the other crazy stuff that I do. But I have a team of people that works with me now, so that takes a lot of the effort off my shoulders, and I can focus on managing them and less on doing the stuff that I was doing, which was being more of a frontline person for issues and questions and things of that nature. So with moving to the new house, it's just basically going to make my life a lot easier to finally have that separation that I had when I was at the office. And that's something you probably, as you just discovered, I mean, even mentioned, is that you're running into the same issue. You're having a hard time separating work and family. It's like, it's very tough to find that time, even though you're home, because you still have those obligations. And in some ways, it's even easier to slip into it because there's no real like separation between the two. It's very blurred.
Yes. And so kind of like a segue to our the meat of the topic here. So photogrammetry is something that I feel like I was pretty late in the game. So just to give some kind of like developer perspective, I think it was 2016 when we just finished Call of Duty Advanced Warfare and we're looking to work on World War II, right? So this is the onslaught of the revival of the World War II shooters, World War I shooters with Battlefield. And so Battlefield was kind of ahead of us into using photogrammetry because they were being released before us. But then on the ground floor, we were finally shifting from using software to create textures to photogrammetry, taking images. And when I looked at that, I was like, okay, this is a whole different type of mindset. This is definitely the future. I can definitely also see how environment artists can be resistant to it, especially texture artists. Is like, what do they do now? Well, there's a lot of prep still, right? But that is like a hard slap in the face for a lot of developers. And we were in a transitional period, so it wasn't guaranteed at that point where this is the way things are going to be. So that was 2016. And fast forward to 2019 with Quixel being the leading software for photogrammetry. Where are we with this? And you being, without divulging too much of NDA or any of that sort, like artists, developers, anybody that is a part of game development that is making somewhat of a realistic game, where do we need to be with the idea of photogrammetry kind of taking over the industry?
I at the risk of saying too much, so I'm going to try to very, very, very heavily moderate what I'm about to say. There are some groundbreaking things coming in the near future. I can't say what exactly, I can't say when, but if you're not using Megascans soon, I would recommend looking into it. It is going to be the future. Megascans is itself just such a powerful ecosystem of tools and textures that you just can't get anywhere else. There is no library in the world that even comes close to the level of quality and the level of just assets, like just the sheer amount that we have. We have over 10,000 assets right now, and each one of them is scanned in such a way that like they're almost visually indistinguishable from reality. And when you throw these things into a real-time engine or even a renderer, it's ridiculous how good the quality is for anybody. And you did bring up a fair point. Yes, in the beginning, people did kind of look at this like, is this kind of like automation, but not? Is this like destroying my job? But what's really happening here is that it's opening up potential that we didn't have before. Instead of having to focus on grunt work and making the same thing every single time. And as you and I both know, we've been artists and we've made production art in the past. That's pretty much all you do. You make stuff that already exists. How many times have we made a tire? How many times have you made a barrel? How many times have you made stone or bricks? How many more times do we need to make the same thing before we just say enough? We don't need to waste time doing this. And that's kind of where companies are getting to with this stuff. It's like, why are we going to keep paying for things that already exist when we can just go here, get it on a bulk discount, and then be done with it, and then just give this to the artist to create something with? So not to, monopolize too much here, but like on your, subject of, artists saying, what do I do now? It's like, well, you now focus on creating art and less on creating the same thing that you already created before. That's been pretty much like what Teddy calls it, is democratizing art. And that's kind of what the entire push that we're doing with Megascans is. That's exactly what we've been trying to do, is to get away from only AAA quality being something that you have to pay millions of dollars for at a studio, to being something that you can do as an indie studio or even as a single person.
The leap that I kind of equate this movement, at least from the PS2 to the PS3. PS2 kind of had it, where the norm app was a big wave of technological shift to the visuals, but also to the technique and pipeline of like, this is the gold standard. It wasn't even until real-time GI became part of our pipeline, and even now ray tracing. But I kind of equate the Megascan or the photogrammetry movement as finally a huge step from a changing of workflow. Not so much as in kind of just eliminating jobs. It is an automation, but just freeing up, like you said, the ability to just focus on creativity. I think a lot of the stuff, there's only so many ways that I want to randomize a rock or a rock formation. I mean, it's the same kind of idea where, I think every environment artist, at least a prop artist, have at least a picture in their mind of when they were sculpting a rock. And and that was never fun. And I know we always dived into those tutorials to like, how do I make the best rock? But it's just so much better time spent doing other creative things to kind of actually have a huge impact on the game that you're actually working on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the again, it's all about democratizing art. It's less about eliminating jobs. Like if your job is just making rocks, then maybe it might come to that point, but there's still going to be applications where a rock needs to be unique, and you may not be able to get that with megascans until we eventually scan every rock known to man, or every rock on the planet. But for the time being, if you're still making traditional art, or you're making art to order, then you don't really have anything to worry about. But it's one of those things that, like, and you'll see this on, like, if you're an old school guy, you know about polycount. I don't know if everybody watching does, but it's a common discussion point in the history of polycount that people will say is using X cheating. X being whatever the subject is at the time, is using a camera cheating, is using Photoshop cheating, is using is using like DeuX cheating, is using Megascans cheating. There's no cheating. The end result is the only thing that matters. And if you can get to that end result before the next guy does, you have the competitive advantage. If you can get to that end result and not waste a bunch of money in the process, you're even better off. So that's really how it all comes down to. Like, the art is a goal in and of itself, but there's also the business aspect of it that a lot of people tend to forget. And while you're out there making the same thing over and over, you're not really proving that you're mastering all these new pipelines that are coming up. And like, Megascans itself is not going away. If anything, it's getting stronger and more studios are using it. And I don't want to toot our own horn too much, but I do think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't know at least the basics of working with a photogrammetry workflow. It is just faster, it's more accurate, and it's just, honestly, to me, more fun to spend more time making what I want to see and less time trying to get all that stuff to put together. It's like buying a Lego kit and then making what I want to make out of it, rather than having to go smelt all the plastic and then put the Lego kit together with all the blueprints to do it, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I always relate it to kind of like another discipline that kind of went through the same kind of shift that we are going through right now. The animators, when mocap became the standard of how they do things, I remember kind of laughing at that, being like, hey, well, I mean, I guess it was nice knowing you. But in reality, it was more like, there's a lot more work to kind of clean up to make that game ready. It was just a good jump start to their job to kind of not waste time. Or at least give some inspiration, because in a mocap studio, a director or anybody that is a lead or animation lead can actually direct and get different results without wasting an animator's time hand keying all that. And so if anything, it has helped the process. And an animator nowadays would have to know some type of, at least a senior or professional, know that workflow to be relevant to any kind of realistic game environment, right? So I feel it's the same with environment artists or artists in general that are using textures in some way, that we have to get used to that workflow, not into the extent that we have to clean up photogrammetry unless you're a studio that isn't using Megascans and using your own photos to clean up. Sure, there is that technical aspect to making it ready. But in most cases, we're most likely using a library full of things to apply. So there are certain differences, but I think there's a shift now that most studios, would you say, are already incorporating photogrammetry if they're making a realistic game? How much of a percentage
absolutely.
Would you say? Okay, a large percentage, right?
Minimum of a large percentage. I'd say at least 50 to 60% of the major studios are using it. I mean, hell, if you go to Quixel.com right now, the landing page is The Lion King. I mean, Disney used Megascans in the production of The Lion King. It's like all over our splash screens and everything. It's a major accomplishment for us to have been part of such an awesome film, and something that so many people have seen, yet they don't even know who we are.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It's like, maybe the cost of the license not even maybe, it absolutely, the cost of the licensing always outweighs the cost of the artist. If it costs, I don't know, $500,000, I'm just going to throw a number out there, to license assets to use for a film or a game, but you end up getting the same work done in half the time. If you had to pay 10 artists to do that, you're saving yourself a ton of time, and you're still employing people to take those assets and put them together and make things. So it's not like anybody's being made redundant. Hell, the scene I'm working on right now, which is why my face keeps getting lit up and all sorts of stuff, because I'm working on Unreal as we talk. I have saved so much time on this project just by incorporating Megascans into it. Of course, I get it for free because I work here, but the point being, time is money. If I have to go back and make all these assets by hand, there's no guarantee that they're A, going to look good, B, be done in time for my personal production timeline, or C, even just be worth the effort. I remember like hell that this actual scene that I'm working on is my old college capstone project, right? And I did this thing over the course of a year, like having to build a character, animate her, build an entire solar system scene to animate a camera flying through it, and then put it all together with an Unreal development kit scene, like really old school here, right? UDK, like putting all this stuff together in the course of a year before I graduated. So I'd have something to show off to say, hey, I have some marketable skills. And yet I'm doing more in like 1 week than I did in 6 months just from using Megascans.
Well, I kind of want to talk about this one pivotal point. A lot of developers, we know two types, right? One that is embracing of bleeding technology, as you should, but another that are kind of stuck in this long game dev cycle, especially if it's like 5 to 8 years to complete a game. They're kind of used to this one particular workflow that they kind of carry out, and 8 years pass in a game dev cycle is a really long time. It's like 2 lifetimes where in a blink of an eye you miss out on a lot of new technology. So what do you say to these people who probably haven't touched or heard of photogrammetry because they're stuck in like a blizzard like long dev cycle where they haven't had the need or the push to actually look at new ways to do things? Like, how do we encourage, and how do you feel like these developers don't get left behind, but obviously are skilled enough to, yeah, I mean, like that, I'm sure like certain friends are so resistant to like every new software that comes out, and they're still using X normal or like a really old baking software. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about.
I know some people like that right off the bat. Like, I know some people who will not use a better baker than X normal because, well, X normal's free. And what else? I already know X normal, therefore there's nothing else that could possibly be better than what I'm already doing. Never mind the fact that it's almost empirically proven at this point that Marmoset Toolbag 3 is the absolute best software for not only previewing assets, but for baking them. I can't think of using anything else. And I was resistant to it at first because I'm like, how good could a tool designed for previewing assets really be at baking? Pardon my language, but really fucking good. Like phenomenally good, like outstandingly good. And if I hadn't just taken that time to look at it and be like, you know what, I need to drop my biases and just look at this thing, see what it does, play with it, and do some test assets. I was a Mighty Bake convert for the longest time. I'm like, I paid money for this, $100 for this license. This has got to be the best out there because I paid for it. You know, that sunk cost fallacy people always bring up. Just because you paid for something at a certain price doesn't mean it's the best thing out there. And just because you've been working with it for the longest time or doing it this way forever doesn't mean it's the best way to work. There are objectively better ways to do everything. That's one of the reasons why photogrammetry is such a good workflow, because you're just, instead of having to replicate things that already exist, you just have those things and you just place them in and work with them like you would traditionally, except you cut out the asset creation process for the raw textures that you apply to things. So what do you say to people who are stuck in that old mindset of, well, this is the way I've always done it, so therefore I'll just keep doing it? You have to change and you have to adapt. We're not lawyers. We're not bankers. We're not technicians. We're artists, and artists that are working on the cutting edge have to stay relevant. And you can't stay relevant if you just say, well, the way I did it 10 years ago is the way I'm always going to do it. Because 10 years ago, we didn't even have PBR. And, we didn't have a lot of these other technologies that make life so much easier. I mean, Unreal 4 wasn't even a thing back then. Unity wasn't really a thing back then. Kind of was, kind of wasn't. There's so many like life-changing workflows that we've gotten over the years that have gotten so much better because people have decided to sink the time into learning them and understanding them. Like 10 years ago, even ZBrush wasn't really much of a thing either. It was around, but it wasn't anywhere near as like capable or as utilized as it is now. Mudbox was still something I worked in, but I gave it up to learn how to use ZBrush. It's like, there's just, sometimes you got to bite the bullet and just say, yeah, I made a choice to learn this, but that doesn't mean it's the right way every single time. You always have to be willing to learn more. You can't just be like, you can't think like you're a boomer, right? You can't just be like, well, I mean, I'm old, therefore I can't change. You can absolutely change. I'm 35 and I'm still learning new stuff. You got to be willing to do that. To be an artist in this industry, you have to constantly be willing to change and challenge yourself. That's part of the process. Like I said, we're not lawyers. The laws and the ways we work don't change every 20 years. They change oftentimes every 6 months, even sooner sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those aching pains. I think out of all the disciplines, environment artists get it the hardest because we're the ones that build the world, and it's kind of like kind of showing off our feathers a bit, but it's true, man. I don't know any other discipline that has like 8 different programs open at once just to do one prop. And at some point I had to stop. I was like, man, because it's great to have that workflow established at a studio where you put in the years where they allow you to have all that software bought so that you can do and be comfortable. But as soon as you shift to a different studio, you're like, how many softwares you need day one? That's when you start realizing, all right, I gotta condense and have to earn my software and my trust with these guys before they shell out like $10,000 off software just for me to get one prop going through. So that's
talk about that too.
Let's talk about that, because that's the other side of the spectrum where I think we all know that one guy who is on the bleeding edge, right? On the bleeding edge of tech, and he has one for unwrapping, he has one for baking, he has one for 3D software, he has one for sculpting, he has one for texturing, he has one for like tileable texturing. It's like, all right, let's take a step back, man. Let's talk about the dangers of that. Yeah.
Sorry, man, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I totally worked with a guy like that. I don't want to name him. I'm not going to say where I worked with him at. But this guy, he came from EA. So everybody thought he was like, hot shit. Like he knew what he was talking about. We were all sim guys. So EA has a studio called Tiburon, which made all of like the Jungle Strike and Nuclear Strike games. If you remember those, the helicopter. Awesome games. But they're better known for making like the Madden games of the EA Sports place. So like it's like the only major game studio we have here in Orlando. And he came from Tiburon and he came to work with us. And all of us being sim drones were like, oh man, this guy's got to be the best. He's got to be amazing. Well, unfortunately, that's not always how it works. Just because you work somewhere doesn't mean you actually know anything. And that's not to be a slight at him. He did know stuff. He was a good artist. But your reputation should not be associated with the company that you work with. Just because you work at big name studio doesn't mean you're the best artist out there. And it definitely doesn't mean that your opinions have the weight of gold. Because this guy like pushed for a ton of software changes in the office we were at. And it was like, we should use Hedis. If you know what Hedis is, Hedis UV layout. It used to be the gold standard for doing UVs.
Dude, it took me a while. Just sorry to take you off tangent here. Not really, but I won't be long, but it took me a while to get off that software because it was like my 4th or 5th studio where I asked for it and they had to send like a dongle because it's being run by one guy. Right. And it's like, all right, at some point I got to abandon this. The software hasn't been updated. I love it, but I got to start looking at options. So.
Yeah, and that was the problem that we had. It's like there was no workflow to be gained, no workflow speeds, no nothing to be gained from working with Hedis. It was good software. It was developed by good people, but it doesn't get used anymore. And we didn't know any better because we just thought this guy knew everything because he came from EA. So that was our mistake. So we bought a bunch of licenses to Hedis. And for a small studio, this was a lot of money. Okay, like this was almost enough to hire another artist for the price that they were offering. And what we ended up doing was like we never used it. We used it like once or twice, and it was like for me, it was faster to just. I had a plugin for Macs that I still use now, Poly Unwrapper. If you've ever heard of that, from polytools3d.com, paid $40 for it, and it speeds up my ability to do unwraps by a factor of like 20. So I'm able to just do quick planar maps and relax them and toss them into a UV layout, and I'm done. And like maybe 5% of the time, it would have taken me to work with something using Hedis, having to slice up polygons and press little hotkeys to figure out what does what. And trying to navigate this user interface that was made in like 1992. I'm like, I can't do this anymore, man. So like nobody used it, but like you said, you get those people that push for these workflows and these software, and then they don't know any better, and they just think that the way I've done it is always the best way. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes the best way is just using your modeling package that you already have. Like 3D Studio Max is something I've been using for 20 years almost, and there's still things I'm learning about it, and there's still almost nothing out there that does unwraps faster than Max in the way that I work. I'm sure if I worked with Maya, there'd be a faster way than Maya, but in Max, using Max's default unwrap UVW window with poly unwrap or augmenting it is the fastest way I've ever done UVs. And I can do stuff on production timelines, get like UVs done in 15 to 20 minutes for complex models, and they don't look bad. So it's all about, like we said earlier, just trying to push yourself to become better at what you do. Because like I said, you can only be, you can be the best lawyer in the world, right? But like, we're not lawyers, we're artists, and artists constantly have to learn new ways to improve because we're fungible. You ever heard of that term?
No, what is that a mixture of?
So fungible is a term that usually refers to commodities. So like when you go buy, like if you were to put a purchase order down for a barrel of oil from Canada and a barrel of oil from like Saudi Arabia are the same thing. As far as the markets are concerned, wherever you get that barrel of oil doesn't matter because it's always worth the same amount. So it doesn't matter where it's come from, where it's been sourced, as long as it's the same grade of oil, it will always be worth the same amount. So if I go put a purchase order for $50 worth of oil on the market, I'm going to get $50 of oil, and it won't matter where it came from because it's all been mixed together. That's my opinion on how we are as artists, because I don't want to compare us literally to barrels of oil on the market, but more that like we are fungible to employers, and we have to be competitive in order to even be employed. You can't be employed if you're going to take forever to make stuff. So to a lot of employers, artists are a dime a dozen. You can always get another artist. If one of them is too slow, they'll replace you. Trust me, I saw it happen plenty of times. It's a market where the employer always wins. So you always have to be the most powerful. It doesn't matter how good of an artist you are. That's the difference between other professions and us. A good lawyer can fetch a ton of money. A good artist can fetch a good amount of money, but will never fetch the same amount as another profession that is more like, I like to say lawyers, but like a good lawyer is going to always make more money than a good artist. There's no way around that, just because the skills are so different. And because of the way the professions are in demand, you need a lawyer more than you need an artist, right? And you need, like, as an employer, if somebody isn't performing, it's so easy to swap them out for somebody that will. And that somebody, like a lot of times in AAA, like you don't even need somebody that is the best ever. You just need somebody that can do the job. So that's kind of what I mean when I say artists are fungible. It's very easy to replace us. And it's always important to be the best you can be if you want to be in this field, because unless you enjoy being unemployed, that can be a very real reality for you if you're not good enough. Hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, man. Like, there's definitely a fine line to kind of be proficient, or at least on the bleeding edge, and constantly evaluating software that is useful to your workflow, but also being mindful of and being adaptable to certain stances where you have to stick to one software, especially when you're working in a smaller team or a smaller development team, where you can like, hey, we can afford 2 software, pick your best. And you come back with saying like, hey, I can't do my full thing with just 2, I need 5. That becomes a problem. And it's something that actually, I don't want to turn this into a Blender talk, but I kind of want to know your opinions on that, because that's a software that's kind of been creeping up in the last 2 years and gaining a lot of ground, which finally I have to look into as a possible scenario or alternative to my 3D package, where I'm like, hey, this is becoming a really powerful, it might be the future very soon. I need to get on
very
this.
Much so. Yeah. You know that joke about vegans? It's like, you know how somebody's a vegan, don't worry, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I feel about people who use Blender. They're always like the first people to say, oh yeah, I use Blender. Hey, guess what? Like nobody's talking about anything, and then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, guess what? I use Blender. Mm-hmm. Blender's great. I have nothing against it. I think it's great software. I just haven't had the time to spend to learn it because I haven't had a necessity to. Now that might sound like I'm contradicting what I've said in the past, but I'm in a position where fortunately I don't need to learn Blender. There's no current necessity to understanding or using it. In fact, I encourage people to learn it. As you said, it's going to be more relevant as time goes on. You and I are both old enough to know that Blender used to be kind of a joke at one point. Not that the software itself was a joke, but the way artists treated it was a joke, which is kind of a really nasty thing. It's like, oh, you use Blender, you'll never get hired. You're a scrub. Well, that's not the case. It's like, use what you can work with. Just because you can't afford a license to Max doesn't mean you're not an artist. It just means that you can't afford a license to Max. So yeah, if you can get a free alternative to something and it works just as good and nobody can tell, absolutely use it. If the free alternative has obvious caveats to it, like it doesn't do one major thing that needs to be done, that's an issue. And if you can't find a way to work around that, I wouldn't recommend working with the software. But Blender has gotten so good lately that like I've seen some stellar art made with it that I would never have thought was made with it. And that just shows how out of touch I am with Blender because I don't keep up with it. But everybody I've ever talked to who uses it, people I work with on System Shock, for example, I know one of the guys, the lead artist, or well, used to be lead artist, he works with Blender nonstop. He makes most of his art with Blender, and you can't tell that it wasn't made with Max or Maya. I mean, polygon's a polygon. It doesn't really matter how it was authored as long as it looks good in the end. So
yeah, it's very true. And I think they had a similar issue where, years ago, even I was making fun of Blender because it was a very hobbyist type of software where anybody who can't afford game development would be using Blender. But they kept on, like the founder and the people who supported the community saw the future and potential. And it wasn't until recent years where like very prominent artists started to take hold of the software and push it to the point where we're like, holy crap, I can't believe that this is actually pushed out. It actually is kind of remind me of the Unity problem, because at first Unity was kind of tailoring towards hobbyists, and the people who had the Made with Unity logo available were only using it for very low level art, or at least producing when we think of Unity, we're thinking of like low budget at first, but it was until recently, now that they have bigger studios, bigger developers a part of that, people are more aware that there are a lot more games made with Unity that can reach the graphic fidelity as other game engines. Yes. And I think Blender kind of went through the same type of cycle where it took a while for other developers to kind of jump on board to really showcase the ability of that software. And that's what I've been seeing in the last year and a half, at least.
That's a good thing too. It's nothing that we didn't need. We need more free alternatives to things. We need more people being, capable of having empathy for those who can't afford software licenses. We need people with ingenuity to make those free assets and those free licenses and those free softwares to be good competition. Because otherwise, what alternative really do we have? We end up with stagnation. There's only so much innovation larger companies are going to do if they don't have somebody else holding them to the fire. That's unfortunately reality of the system that we live in. Whether you like capitalism or don't, I'm not going to get into my position on that subject. But ultimately, it's like that is the system we live in, and that is generally how the rule is played, is that unless something is competing with something else, the field of product that is being offered tends to stagnate over time. So there's nothing really more to hold somebody to the fire than free alternatives to very expensive software. So if nothing else, I welcome Blender for that, because it's a very, very good breath of fresh air and a very good step in the right direction for the entire industry to have people with the ability to do AAA style modeling, like good stuff that doesn't require a ton of money. That there's nothing but good that comes out of that.
Yeah, it definitely pushes other 3D packages to kind of step up their game, to kind of signify why the worth is there, the value is there. If there's a free software that does things just as good or better, right? So it's been lacking in competition in terms of 3D package. So I'm glad in the last year and a half we're seeing kind of like this shift in mentality, and all, like you said, the vegans in the office are kind of laughing at us now because we're going to them for expert advice. Like, how do you get started in this software that you've been championing for the last 5 years, just talking my ears off? And now they're like kind of sitting on a high horse, gladly, because we do need them. But it is funny how the tables have turned.
And that is why I try not to badmouth other software, because you never know when you're going to need someone to help you with it.
Yeah, pretty much. So being in this industry of ours, and with the console shift fastly coming upon us, we think that we've seen what the next 5 years look like, with the ray tracing being powerful enough that we are handling. I think we're still in the cusp about, I think people are finally getting a handle on it to make it performant within a game. Right? I don't know how it's going to look within a console. I don't know if we're there yet, but photogrammetry being transformative in our texturing techniques, like what other adaptation and evolving do you see the industry going with the, let's just call it the PS5 and the what's the next Xbox? The next Xbox era for game development.
What is it?
I think they call it
turn around.
I think they call it like the Scarlet, but I don't know the real name of it yet.
I don't keep up to date too much with console developments. I usually just buy them about a year or two after, just to make sure that I don't get a brick. You know how bad we got burned on the 360 PS3 era with all the stuff that just burnt up for no good reason.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to be a little bit more cautious when it comes to consoles, but I can only imagine that they have to compete in the PC market, because the titles that are being developed for PCs oftentimes are also being ported from PCs, right? So it's not like we were with the BioShock era where like stuff is being made for consoles and then ported over to PCs. Largely these days, everything is basically made to the same specs, and just consoles tend to run them at lower specs, but like most people can't tell the difference unless you're like right up in the screen. So I don't really see it being much of a paradigm shift. I think what's going to end up happening is you're just going to get better visuals, and you're going to end up playing most of the same games, except for the stuff that's always console exclusive. Like, well, up until recently, like the Ace Combat games, for example, like GDC 2018, I got to go play the 7th one, like before it got released. And it's like, I couldn't believe how awesome that looked on a PS4. I can only imagine what Namco is going to do with, the next Ace Combat game on a PS5. Like, I couldn't even believe they put it on PC, but like, that just shows you how interchangeable this stuff is today. Like, the PC version looks pretty much identical to the PS4 version. Even the PS4 Pro, there's not much of a difference between them. So,
yeah, it's going to be very tough as these consoles are getting stronger and stronger to kind of differentiate. There's always going to be, I think, the hardcore people that will be able to tell the difference between a $2,000 rig versus a $500 console.
Oh, yes.
But to the regular consumer, I don't think there'll be much of a difference, because that's all they really see. Therefore, if there's an upgrade on the PC, they're just glad, right? But they're not really comparing which copy am I really getting, because most people don't have like $2,000 rigs. So,
and that's another issue with consoles too. To wrap up the subject on that, it's like there's not much of a difference between them. I mean, they're basically PCs these days. Like, I mean, I saw what was it on Reddit? Somebody had taken a PS4 and put Windows on it.
Yeah.
So it's, what's the difference between that and a PC? It's just a box that's already been, it's a pre-built PC that you connect to your TV. That's pretty much all it is. So, and that it also happens to have like exclusive games. So ultimately, there's really not much of any major difference.
Yeah. Development wise, I think everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief when PlayStation, the Xbox has decided to kind of make their boxes really similar, because during the PS2 and their 60 days, PS2 was, well, not PS2, was it PS3? No, PS2. Yeah, PS2 was a pain to develop for.
No.
Yeah, because of the is it PS3? I thought PS3 they kind of
because the 360 was competing with the PS3, and the PS3 had a weird architecture on the CPU that nobody could figure out.
Right. And they fixed it with the PS4, yeah. On the console side, on the development side, it was a pain because we were constantly kind of running into problems. And 360 became like the base platform to kind of figure shit out. And then the PS3 was like whatever's left over, port it, just make it run.
Yeah,
it was a huge sacrifice. Yeah, a huge space.
I love the PlayStation 2.
Yeah. The Sony brand is strong. But like, I mean, these are the shifts that we've seen on the technological front. And as we mentioned before, the photogrammetry, I think, is already established enough that people are at least working on these AAA franchises are finally embraced. I think the last big game that came out was something Galen already voiced when we had him on the podcast, where it was the God of War, where they were still sculpting rocks and doing that a lot by hand. But I think that was the last major big game or major studio that hasn't fully embraced photogrammetry as the way to go.
Oh, everybody's going to embrace it eventually. It's the way of the future. Just like PBR was the wave of the future. Eventually, everybody will come over to it. It's a cost-effective, proven method to work. Like, I'll share my screen with you if you want to see the project that I'm currently developing.
Oh yeah, do it.
This was actually, let me show you my what do you call it? My college capstone first, and then you can kind of get an idea of just how much this thing has actually changed over the years. So this is what it used to look like. Okay. So this is UDK, super basic. Like, this was what I meant when I talked about photogrammetry as improving my workflow. These textures, like this bark, this up here, like the dead fronds, these fronds themselves, those are all pictures I took when I lived in Tampa at the apartment complex I was at going to school. These philodendrons here, the bark on this palmetto bush, all that stuff. Like, I literally built doing a really even these elephant ears, crude photogrammetry workflow, like just taking pictures and using the original version of Endu on it and then turning it into a normal map. That's where I was. And that's why I look at it being so amazing, because now I've got this, and I did all this in a week, and it took me close to like several months to even get the same area done, building it all by hand. Like, I took Quixel Mixer, one of our texturing tools that you can use to blend scans together, and created this tileable floor, which doesn't even use displacement. This is just like tracing over the geo, or tracing over what would have been displaced using max. So just using hard edges and whatnot, and then softening the normals. And then the same thing with this wall here too. So like I've taken the photogrammetry workflow that we use at Megascans, and I've just put it into my pipeline for my personal art. And what I've done is I've taken all the stuff that I had to make by hand before that I was going to take pictures of anyway, and then put that into a scene wherein I didn't have to make all that stuff. And I was able to get to the end result that I wanted to get in a much reduced amount of time. I'm trying to find the best way to put this. It's like, it just looks better by orders of magnitude. It's faster by another order of magnitude. And in the end result, like, I get to it, and I don't feel like I'm stressed out. I just enjoy the creation. So I put more effort into the other details that I might have been too tired to focus on, like these, like these bits of fog on the sides that are rolling in, kind of like the SF Bay during the evening hours or something. Just little tiny details that I would have missed before. I'm not even like 20% done with this. I have like trees and stuff I need to add up here, but it's so much faster to work this way, because I can just focus on putting these pieces in that I want to put in, rather than having to make it all by hand.
Yeah, definitely. As you are kind of, I know you kind of help with the technical bugs and anything that customers of Quixel would actually hit you up on. But like, I wonder too, what the kind of reasoning behind studios that don't want to go fully on board with photogrammetry. Could it be just they think they want to create their own library and they don't want to do Megascans? Or what are some of the prior reasons on why they are not fully sold on this workflow?
So I don't want to get too much into it, because some of it's like proprietary info that these studios have given me, so I can't really just talk about it. But as a general overview, a lot of what it ends up being is price. And that is one of the biggest hurdles that anybody has. Like when you're an artist and you're trying to convince your boss to let you work with the newest version of whatever that you want to work with. Like say you want to work with Toolbag and do baking in there instead of having to wrangle around XNormal. You know how fast it works, and the price difference between having to sit there and wrangle with XNormal and the amount of hourly wages you're going to spend doing that versus just getting the bake the first time in Toolbag. Is going to pay for itself the first time you bake something. But your boss doesn't know that because they may not understand the intricacies of what you do as well as you do, because that's what they hired you to do. The problem with that is, like, oftentimes these companies will reach out to, I'm not going to name names again, but they'll want a license, and then we give them a quote, and they're like, well, this is too expensive because it doesn't fit with what we thought. And then what I end up saying is, well, imagine paying an artist to make everything and the amount of time it would have to take to get all this stuff built, and then hope it actually reaches the same level of quality and hope that it reaches the same timelines that we have, because we offer instant access, right? You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for the artist to build these things to order. You already have rocks. You have components for trees. You have dirt. You have grass. Hell, we even have swamp water, oddly enough. There's all these different things you can put together that are already ready to go. Right out of the box, you put them into your scene, you put them into Unreal, Unity, your favorite renderer, whatever it is that you're working with. You just cut out that middleman of time. And you also cut out that middleman of uncertain expectations, because you're an artist and I'm an artist, and you know that we don't always make everything perfectly. But when you have something scanned exactly the same way, exactly the same methods used every single time, you can always be sure that it's going to be perfect, that it's going to slot into what it is that you're trying to work with, that you don't have to worry about whether or not there's massive black splotches that maybe you missed when you did a bake, or your UVs are stretched or skewed or something because you try to rush through it and get it done. There's all these hidden benefits that a lot of companies don't see when they look at these things. And that's even just true with any texture library in general. It's like you're paying to have these things done, and you don't have to worry about it, and you can integrate them into your end result. You're not paying so much for what's the best way to put it? You're not paying to replace people. You're paying to just get to that end result faster.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I think it's often overlooked or underestimated how long it takes to prepare something to finally get it to use. And especially having a library that you can drag and drop essentially to make your game look good right now is something that I think everybody appreciate to get to the next level for sure. If not, get on with the program, because I feel like every 3-5 years there's like a wash that happens where the old devs that are resistant to change are facing newer and younger developers that are embracing change, especially coming in with newer software that already improves their momentum of being young and ready to kind of just work hard and grind. That's where the danger shifts for a lot of developers that I know that just very slow or resistant to everything that's happening. So that's why it's a subject that I feel like every 3-5 years, no matter what it is, photogrammetry, lighting, or anything of that sort, that developers need to really be careful on, and just be okay. I think if anything, if you have the time to at least look into these type of new techniques, new tools, to see if it's useful or not, that's fine, but at least be aware of it so that when the new hot shot comes in the office, you can keep up, right? That's the scary thing, where I feel like a lot of these developers are just completely shocked and so behind, where it's hard to at that point to justify their higher salary. Sometimes it's like, well, you are supposed to be the best here, and we're paying you double of this new kid who's able to do the work in 1/4 the time. What's going on? So that's the conversation that happens a lot, that I always warn developers about, especially when new things happening.
I guess we're probably getting ready to close up here soon, but one of the things I would recommend to everybody listening, don't be one of those, I'll just come out and say it, one of those old fogies in art where they're like, everything you're doing now is cheating. If you're trying to improve your workflow and you're using asset libraries or whatever, it's cheating. There is no cheating in getting art done. It's the same like principle behind warfare and love, right? There's no cheating in that either. It's like everything is fair. If you can get to that end result and you can get there before the other guy competing with you for your job, absolutely do it. If it's illegal, I mean, yeah, make sure it's legal. I mean, don't do anything stupid.
Yeah.
Like, don't go murder somebody to make your art faster or something. But if you can use a texture library to get to that end result and it makes your work that much better, do it. There's no reason why you shouldn't. If you have this misplaced, or not, let me rephrase. If you have a sense of honor or dignity or something that prevents you from using asset libraries, try to get past that. It's really nothing more than a personal limitation, because you're going to find that not everybody shares your personal code of ethics on these things. And using an asset library is not cheating. There's no way it could possibly be construed as such, because if every tool that comes along that makes your job easier is cheating, then you have to go all the way back to follow the logical root of that argument, which is using a computer is cheating, because there's no other reason why it wouldn't be. If you're old enough like me, I'm 35. I remember when people would complain about making art on the computer. Like, you're not a real artist if you use Photoshop. Only real artists use paintbrushes. And you're not a real photographer if you use digital photography. You're only a real artist if you go and develop the film yourself in a dark room that you built in your basement. I'm like, the gatekeeping's got to stop. Eventually it will, but like, don't be like that. Like, if it makes your job easier and it's legal, do it. There's no reason other than artificial handicaps and trying to earn respect of people that may not even care. Nobody that I've ever shown my art to who doesn't work in this industry cared that I did it with Megascans. They cared that the end result was done. My bosses have never cared that I use Megascans in the work that I developed. They cared that the work was done. If you can say that you did it all yourself, if that's how you want to work, go for it. But don't look down on other people because they use tools and things that make their job easier, because ultimately that's the whole point of being an artist. It's finding better ways to do these things while improving your visual quality. It's not about trying to suffer just so you can make it take 10 times longer and say, well, I did it all myself, therefore it's the best. It's like, if you like to work that way, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't think that, like, don't fall victim to that trap. That is a method of thinking that doesn't really get you any further with your career. And I should know, because I was one of those people. Hell, but I was in the wrong direction. Like, I was like, oh, why would you ever work on personal art? Like, I already work all day long. Why would I want to come home and make more art? Because if I could go back and slap like a 25-year-old me a little bit, I would say, because you need to stay relevant. This is the profession you entered. It's a competitive profession. There's nothing you can do about that except to stay relevant. And if you can't stay relevant, you're going to get replaced, because there's all these people coming up now who would love your job.
Definitely. So any tool set, I definitely sign off on that. That's going to improve your workflow and stay competitive in a legal way. Highly encouraged. So don't go out there and start breaking fingers. So Jonathan, thank you for coming on and joining us with DeuX. This is an enlightening talk. It's something that I feel every 3-5 years, like I said, there's a changing of tide, and you either with it or without, or being left behind, right? So these are wise words. I highly encourage any artists or developers out there to constantly think about being relevant. And thank you. If there is a way that listeners and viewers out there can reach you or follow you, where would that be?
If you want to look at my personal art, it is artstation.com/synesthesia, which is difficult to type. So just look up Jonathan Holmes on ArtStation. You'll find me. I have a big goofy grin. It's very tough to not see it. I regularly post work that I make there. The scene that I showed you guys, haven't shown it outside of Quixel. Hopefully I'll be done with that within the month. So that'll go up there soon. I usually do breakdowns on how I do this stuff. So anybody who wants to learn or is just curious or just wants to know how I did some of this stuff, I would gladly share. I love helping people out because, when I was younger, I didn't have the same resources. There weren't tutorials everywhere for everything. And if there were, it was like a really basic tutorial that kind of like sucked. You know what I'm talking about. So it's like having the ability to learn from other people is so important, and being able to share that knowledge is too. So like, if you take anything else out of this conversation that we're having, like, just try to be a good person and just share the knowledge, because we all came from somewhere and nobody knew everything being born. And if you can help other people, you're helping yourself, because like that's really the reason why we exist, is to make the world better for everybody else, not to hoard information and just try to hold that competitive advantage. If your work is good, it's going to speak for itself. If your work isn't, well, there's not a whole lot you can do about that except try to improve. And the only way to improve is to learn from others. And if you can't learn from others, well, or at least the least you can do is try to, teach other people what you know, so that other people have an easier time of getting to that point. It doesn't mean you're teaching them to take your job. It just means that you're making friends and connections. And that's the kind of thing that you need to be a good artist. It's not just the work. It's also being a good person and having that network that supports you when you need help, just like you help them.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, it's been a pleasure. It's always fun kind of sitting there with you and kind of going through this. Always make me feel a little lazier after every time we talk. You're always having new artwork up. It's like, oh man, I need to be relevant. Jonathan's going to take all my jobs. But I want to thank you, and I'm on behalf of everybody that's viewing, for your time. We are definitely going to follow up with your journey and your ArtStation and follow you on other social platforms as you have pointed out. And thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Definitely going to probably hear you back on our podcast at some time.
I'd love to be back. You guys are always a pleasure to hang out with. Of
course, man. Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to let you go and say hi to the family for me. Be an odd greeting. It's like Brandon said hi. Who the hell is Brandon? That works too.